In the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, where every gesture carries the weight of tradition and every glance speaks volumes, there are moments when the human heart breaks free from royal protocol. This is the story of such a moment, when a future king reached for the hand of his daughter-in-law not as a monarch, but as a father desperate to offer comfort in the face of unimaginable pain. What happened in those few seconds would shake the very foundations of the royal family, revealing cracks that had been carefully hidden behind centuries of tradition. It was a simple gesture, one hand reaching for another, yet it would expose the deep divisions that threatened to tear apart the House of Windsor forever. Some said it was the most human moment the royal family had ever shown. Others called it a dangerous break from protocol that could never be forgiven. But, for Kate, standing there in her darkest hour, it was the lifeline she desperately needed, even as powerful forces worked to pull it away. This is the true story of love, loyalty, and the price of standing up for what's right when the whole world is watching. The morning mist clung to the windows of Kensington Palace like a shroud, as if nature itself sensed the weight of the day ahead. Kate Middleton stood before her bedroom mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she applied the final touches of makeup that would hide the sleepless nights written across her face. Today was not just any royal engagement. It was the day that would test everything she had learned about being a member of the most watched family in the world. The phone call had come 3 days earlier, delivered in Camilla's crisp, authoritative tone. The Queen Consort had made it clear that Kate's presence was required at the annual Royal Family Unity Gala, an event that brought together various charities under the Crown's patronage. But this wasn't about charity work, and Kate knew it. This was about making a statement, about showing the world that despite the recent scandals and whispered conversations in palace corridors, the royal family remained unshakable. Kate's personal struggles had become the subject of intense media speculation over the past months. The relentless pressure of royal duties, combined with deeply personal challenges she faced behind closed doors, had begun to take their toll. Photographers had captured moments when her smile seemed forced, when her usual grace appeared strained. The tabloids had begun their familiar dance of speculation and manufactured drama, but this time, the pain they were dissecting was devastatingly real. William had left early that morning for a series of engagements in Scotland, his absence feeling more pronounced than usual. Their relationship, once the fairy tale the world celebrated, had been tested by the immense pressures of royal life and personal struggles that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. The distance between them wasn't just physical. It was emotional, created by the weight of expectations and the suffocating nature of their public roles. Charles had noticed the change in Kate during their last family dinner at Clarence's house. The way she pushed food around her plate without eating, the distant look in her eyes when conversation flowed around her, the careful way she chose her words as if each one might betray the turmoil inside. As a father figure to Kate, Charles had always felt a protective instinct toward her, remembering how she had breathed new life into William after Diana's death, how she had brought genuine warmth to a family that sometimes struggled with public displays of emotion. The relationship between Charles and Kate had always been special. From the early days of her relationship with William, Charles had seen in Kate something that reminded him of Diana's better qualities, her natural empathy, her ability to connect with people from all walks of life, her genuine care for others. Unlike his relationship with Camilla, which was built on years of shared experience and understanding, his bond with Kate was paternal, protective, and deeply emotional. Camilla, however, viewed Kate's recent struggles through a different lens. As someone who had fought her own battles to gain acceptance within the royal family, Camilla believed in the importance of maintaining appearances above all else. She had endured decades of public criticism and had learned to develop a thick skin, expecting others to do the same. In her mind, Kate's visible struggles were a sign of weakness that could be exploited by the media and damage the crown's reputation. The tension between Camilla and Kate had been building for months, though both women had been careful to maintain public civility. Their approaches to royal duty were fundamentally different. Kate believed in authentic connection and showing genuine emotion when appropriate, while Camilla favored the traditional approach of maintaining dignity through emotional distance. These philosophical differences had created an undercurrent of disagreement that palace staff had begun to notice and whisper about. The morning of the gala, Kate received a series of text messages from friends and family offering support. Her mother, Carol Middleton, had called the night before, her voice filled with maternal concern. "You don't have to be perfect all the time, darling," she had said. Even princesses are allowed to be human. But Kate knew that being human in the royal family came with consequences that her mother, despite her years of experience with royal life, couldn't fully understand. As Kate's lady-in-waiting helped her into the elegant navy dress chosen for the evening, a color selected to convey stability and trust, she thought about the young woman she had been when she first fell in love with William at university. That Kate had been confident, adventurous, unafraid to speak her mind. Royal life had refined her, taught her protocol and grace, but sometimes she wondered if it had also dimmed some essential part of who she was. The car journey to the venue was silent except for the soft hum of London traffic. Kate's protection officer, a kind man who had been with her for several years, occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror with concerned eyes. He had seen her through many difficult moments, and his intuition told him that tonight would be particularly challenging. The way she held herself, the distant look in her eyes, the careful way she breathed, all signs that she was struggling to maintain her composure. The venue itself was magnificent, a historic London hall decorated with flowers and lights that created an atmosphere of elegance and celebration. As guests began to arrive, the familiar ballet of royal events commenced. Photographers positioned themselves strategically, guests checked their appearances one final time, and staff moved with practiced efficiency to ensure every detail was perfect. Charles arrived 20 minutes before the official start time, as was his custom. He moved through the receiving area with the easy confidence of someone who had been attending such events his entire life. But his eyes searched the crowd for Kate. When he spotted her near the entrance, speaking with a group of charity representatives, he noticed immediately that something was wrong. Her smile was present, but didn't reach her eyes, and there was a tension in her shoulders that spoke of barely controlled emotion. Camilla arrived with her usual entourage, looking regal in a deep purple gown that commanded attention. She surveyed the room with the calculating gaze of someone who understood the political undercurrents of every royal gathering. When she saw Kate, her expression remained neutral, but those who knew her well could detect the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested displeasure. The evening's program included speeches from various charity leaders, presentations of awards, and the traditional royal mingling that allowed the family to connect with supporters and beneficiaries. Kate moved through these activities with practiced grace, but Charles, watching from across the room, could see the effort it was taking her to maintain her composure. During one particularly emotional speech about children's mental health, a cause close to Kate's heart, he saw her hands tremble slightly as she applauded. The moment that would change everything began during a lull in the formal program. Kate had excused herself briefly, stepping into a quieter corridor adjacent to the main hall to collect herself. The weight of performing happiness while struggling internally had become almost unbearable. She stood alone for a moment, her back against the wall, closing her eyes and trying to find the strength to continue through the evening. It was then that Charles found her. He had noticed her absence from the main room and had quietly followed, his paternal instincts overriding royal protocol. When he saw her in the corridor, her usual composure cracked just enough for him to see the pain she was carrying. His heart broke for her. This was the young woman who had brought such joy to his son, who had embraced royal duty with grace and dedication, who had become like a daughter to him in many ways. "Kate," he said softly, approaching with the gentle manner he reserved for his most precious family moments. "Are you all right?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly undid her completely. For weeks, people had asked her how she was, but the question had always been superficial, part of social convention. Charles's inquiry cut through all pretense and reached the scared, struggling woman beneath the royal facade. "I'm managing, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, using the formal address that had become second nature despite their close relationship. Charles moved closer, and, in that moment, he saw past the title, past the protocol, past everything that separated them in the eyes of the world. He saw a young woman in pain, someone he cared about deeply, someone who needed comfort that went beyond words. Without thinking, he reached out and gently took her hand in his. It was a gesture so simple, so human, yet so radical in the context of royal behavior that it seemed to stop time. Kate looked down at their joined hands, surprised by the warmth and comfort she felt in that connection. For just a moment, the weight she had been carrying seemed a little lighter. But they were not alone. Camilla had noticed their absence from the main room and had come looking for them, her instincts sharp from years of navigating royal politics. When she rounded the corner and saw Charles holding Kate's hand in such an intimate, emotional moment, her reaction was swift and decisive. "Charles," she said, her voice cutting through the tender moment like ice. "The Archbishop is asking for you." The spell was broken. Charles felt the familiar weight of duty and expectation settling back onto his shoulders, but he didn't immediately release Kate's hand. For a few seconds that seemed to stretch into eternity, he faced a choice between the woman he had married and built a life with, and the young woman who had become like a daughter to him, who clearly needed his support in this moment. Camilla's eyes moved from their joined hands to Charles's face, her expression conveying a message that was unmistakable despite her public smile. This display of emotion, this break from protocol, was unacceptable. In her view, it showed weakness at a time when the royal family needed to project strength and unity. "Kate, darling," Camilla continued, her tone pleasant but firm, "Lady Pemberton has been looking for you. She wants to discuss the children's hospital visit next month." The message was clear: return to your duties, maintain the facade, act the part that the public expects to see. Kate felt the moment slipping away, the brief comfort she had found in Charles's gesture evaporating under Camilla's disapproving gaze. Charles faced an impossible choice. His relationship with Camilla had been built on mutual support and understanding, forged through years of public scrutiny and private challenges. She had stood by him when the world questioned their relationship, had helped him navigate the complexities of becoming king. Her judgment in royal matters had proven sound time and again, and he had learned to trust her instincts about public perception and royal protocol. But Kate was different. She represented not just his son's happiness, but a bridge between the royal family and a new generation. Her struggles weren't just personal. They reflected the enormous pressure that came with modern royal life, pressure that Charles himself understood all too well. The corridor fell silent except for the distant sound of conversation and laughter from the main hall. In that silence, three people stood frozen in a moment that would define relationships and loyalties for years to come. Charles's hand still held Kate's, while Camilla's presence loomed between them, representing duty, protocol, and the expectations of centuries of royal tradition. What happened next would reveal the true nature of love, loyalty, and power within the House of Windsor, setting in motion events that no one could have predicted, and changing the dynamics of the royal family forever. The silence in the corridor stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. Charles felt the weight of Camilla's expectation pressing down on him, while Kate's trembling hand in his seemed to anchor him to something more fundamental than royal protocol: basic human compassion. The three of them stood frozen in this tableau of conflicting loyalties, each representing different aspects of what it meant to be royal in the modern world. Charles had spent his entire life learning when to bend to duty and when to stand firm on principle. His marriage to Camilla had been the greatest example of the latter. He had waited decades to marry the woman he loved, enduring public criticism and family disapproval. Now, faced with another moment that demanded he choose between expectation and what felt right, he found himself paralyzed by the complexity of the situation. Kate's breathing was shallow, her composure hanging by the thinnest of threads. The brief comfort she had found in Charles's gesture was being systematically dismantled by Camilla's presence and the return of royal expectations. She could feel the walls closing in again, the suffocating weight of always having to be perfect, always having to smile, always having to pretend that the enormous pressure of royal life wasn't slowly crushing her spirit. Camilla's expression remained controlled, but those who knew her well would have recognized the steel beneath her pleasant demeanor. She had fought too hard to establish her place within the royal family to watch it potentially undermined by what she saw as emotional weakness. Her own journey to acceptance had been marked by criticism and challenge, and she had learned that survival in royal circles required an almost impenetrable emotional armor. "The guests are beginning to notice," Camilla added quietly, her words carefully chosen to remind both Charles and Kate of their public responsibilities. It was true. Their absence from the main hall had not gone unnoticed. Palace staff were beginning to make subtle inquiries, and the more observant guests had begun to glance toward the corridor entrance. Charles felt Kate's hand tighten almost imperceptibly in his, a silent plea for him not to abandon her in this moment. But he also felt the weight of his crown, his marriage, and decades of conditioning that demanded he prioritize duty above personal feelings. The internal struggle was visible in his face, the man who had learned to compartmentalize emotion warring with the father figure who couldn't bear to see Kate suffer. "Perhaps we should return together," Charles said finally, his voice carefully neutral. But he still didn't release Kate's hand, and this small act of defiance did not go unnoticed by Camilla. Kate closed her eyes briefly, understanding that this moment of connection was about to end, but grateful for every second it had lasted. In Charles's grip, she had felt less alone than she had in months. It wasn't just physical comfort. It was the acknowledgement that her struggles were real and valid, that someone in the family understood the weight she was carrying. Camilla stepped closer, her movement deliberate and graceful, but carrying an unmistakable message. "Charles, darling," she said, her tone affectionate but firm, "Lady Pemberton really is quite insistent. And the photographers will want pictures of the three of us together before the evening concludes." The mention of photographers was strategic. Camilla understood better than most how images could shape public perception. A photograph of Charles and Kate in an intimate moment, with her notably absent, could fuel speculation about family divisions. Conversely, images of all three of them together, projecting unity and composure, would reinforce the narrative of royal stability that the palace worked so hard to maintain. Charles knew she was right. His role as king meant that every public appearance was a performance, every gesture analyzed and interpreted by media and public alike. The brief moment of human connection he had shared with Kate, while personally meaningful, could be misunderstood or manipulated by those looking for signs of weakness or discord within the royal family. But Kate's need was real and immediate. Charles could see the pain in her eyes, could feel the tension in her hand, could sense that she was reaching a breaking point that might have consequences far beyond this single evening. His protective instincts, honed by years of watching his sons navigate the pressures of royal life, told him that Kate needed support more than the public needed another perfect royal performance. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor forced the moment to a crisis. A palace aide rounded the corner, clearly looking for them, his relief evident when he spotted the trio. "Your Majesty," he said with a slight bow, "the charity representatives are ready for the presentation ceremony." This interruption provided Camilla with the opening she needed. "Of course," she said smoothly, already moving toward the aide. "We'll be right along." Her expectation was clear. Charles would follow, Kate would compose herself, and they would all return to the performance that royal life demanded. But Charles didn't move. His hand remained firmly clasped around Kate's, and for a moment that seemed to last forever, he made a choice that prioritized love over duty, human connection over royal protocol. "Give us just another moment," he said quietly to the aide, who nodded and retreated, sensing the undercurrents he didn't fully understand. Camilla's facade cracked just slightly, her surprise and displeasure flickering across her features before she regained control. She had expected Charles to follow her lead, as he had done countless times throughout their marriage. His decision to remain with Kate, to continue this display of emotional support, represented a challenge to her authority and judgment that she hadn't anticipated. "Charles," she said, and now there was an edge to her voice that cut through the corridor's silence. "This isn't appropriate." The word appropriate hung in the air like an accusation. It represented everything that Kate had come to struggle with about royal life. The constant judgment about what was proper, what was suitable, what met the impossibly high standards of royal behavior. She had spent years trying to be appropriate, trying to fit into a role that sometimes seemed designed to squeeze the humanity out of its participants. Kate felt tears threatening for the first time that evening. Not tears of sadness, but tears of frustration and exhaustion from trying so hard to be perfect, from carrying burdens that no one seemed to understand, from feeling isolated even when surrounded by family. Charles's hand in hers was the first genuine comfort she had received in weeks, and the thought of losing it felt unbearable. Charles looked between the two women who represented different aspects of his life and responsibility. Camilla, who had stood by him through public scandals and private struggles, who understood the weight of the crown and the sacrifices it demanded, and Kate, who represented the future of the monarchy, who had brought joy to his son and grandchildren, who was struggling under pressures that he himself had experienced and understood all too well. "Sometimes," Charles said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of decades of royal experience, "being appropriate means being human." These words, simple but profound, cut to the heart of the tension that had been building within the royal family for months. The balance between duty and humanity, between public expectation and private need, between maintaining traditions and adapting to changing times. All of these conflicts were crystallized in this moment. Camilla's reaction was swift and decisive. "Humanity has its place," she replied, her voice now cold with disapproval. "But that place is private, not in the corridors where staff and guests might witness it." Kate felt the criticism like a physical blow. The suggestion that her need for comfort, her moment of vulnerability, was somehow shameful or inappropriate, struck at her deepest insecurities about her place in the royal family. Despite years of dedication to her role, despite the sacrifices she had made and the grace with which she had handled public scrutiny, she was still being judged as somehow insufficient, somehow wrong for showing human emotion. Charles felt Kate's hand begin to slip from his as she started to withdraw, both physically and emotionally. He could see her rebuilding the walls that had briefly come down, could watch her retreating into the safe but isolated space that royal protocol demanded. The sight of her pulling away, of returning to the lonely struggle that had been consuming her for months, made his decision for him. Instead of releasing her hand, he tightened his grip gently but firmly. "Kate," he said, using her name rather than any formal title, "you don't have to carry everything alone." These words, spoken with such genuine warmth and understanding, nearly broke Kate's composure completely. They acknowledged not just her current struggle, but the broader challenge of being a woman in the royal family, of trying to balance personal needs with public duty, of maintaining individual identity within an institution that sometimes seemed designed to erase it. Camilla watched this exchange with growing alarm. She could see the emotional connection between Charles and Kate strengthening, could see the way Kate responded to his validation and support. But, more than that, she could see the potential for this moment to undermine the carefully maintained image of royal unity and strength that she believed was essential to the monarchy's survival. "Charles," she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her authority as queen consort, "I need you to let go of her hand." Now, the demand was unmistakable, delivered with the expectation of immediate compliance. It represented more than just a request for appropriate behavior. It was a test of loyalty, of Charles's commitment to the partnership that had sustained him through his most difficult years. The corridor fell silent again, but this time the silence was charged with conflict and consequence. Charles faced a choice that would define not just this evening, but the future dynamics of his family relationships. Kate stood frozen, afraid to hope that Charles would continue to support her, but equally afraid of the consequences if he did. What happened in the next few moments would ripple through the royal family for years to come, affecting relationships, changing alliances, and ultimately forcing each of them to confront fundamental questions about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of family in the world's most watched dynasty. The air in the corridor seemed to thicken with tension as Camilla's words hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Charles had faced many difficult moments in his long life. The death of his mother, the challenges of his first marriage, the years of public criticism about his relationship with Camilla, but few had presented such a stark choice between competing loyalties and values. Kate could feel her heart pounding so hard, she was certain both Charles and Camilla could hear it. Her hand in Charles's had become both an anchor and a burden. She desperately needed the connection it represented, but she was acutely aware that maintaining it might come at a cost that went far beyond this single moment. The thought of being responsible for creating a rift between Charles and Camilla, especially when Camilla had worked so hard to establish her place in the royal family, filled Kate with guilt and self-doubt. Charles looked directly at Camilla, seeing in her face the woman who had stood beside him through decades of challenge and change. Her strength had been his foundation. Her understanding of royal life had guided him through countless difficult decisions. She had earned her place as his partner through loyalty, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to the institution they both served. The respect and love he felt for her was real and deep, built on years of shared experience and mutual support. But as he looked at Kate, he saw something that touched a different part of his heart, the protective instinct of a father, the empathy of someone who had himself struggled under the weight of royal expectations, the recognition of genuine suffering that demanded response regardless of protocol. Kate reminded him of his sons at their most vulnerable moments, when the pressure of their roles had threatened to overwhelm their essential humanity. "Camilla," Charles said carefully, his voice steady but carrying undertones of emotion that she knew well enough to recognize as determination. Kate is family. When family is hurting, we don't abandon them for the sake of appearances. These words struck Camilla like a physical blow. The suggestion that she was prioritizing appearances over family welfare cut deeply, particularly coming from the man whose own struggles with balancing duty and personal happiness she had shared and supported for so many years. She had thought they were aligned in their understanding of what the monarchy required, what sacrifices were necessary to maintain its stability and respect. "I'm not asking you to abandon anyone," Camilla replied, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I'm asking you to remember where we are and what we represent. This corridor is not private. Staff members have already seen you, and guests are beginning to notice your absence. Every moment we spend here is another opportunity for misunderstanding and speculation." Kate wanted to disappear into the floor. The idea that her need for comfort was creating problems for the family, that her moment of vulnerability was being seen as a threat to royal stability, made her want to withdraw completely from both Charles and Camilla and handle her struggles entirely alone. She had spent years trying to be the perfect royal family member, and the suggestion that she was failing in that role cut to the core of her deepest fears. Charles felt Kate's hand beginning to tremble in his, could sense her internal retreat, and something deep within him rebelled against the idea of forcing her back into isolation for the sake of maintaining an image. His own childhood, marked by emotional distance and the prioritization of duty over feeling, had taught him the cost of such choices. He had watched his son struggle with similar pressures, had seen how the lack of genuine emotional support could damage a person's spirit in ways that years of therapy couldn't fully heal. "The guests can wait another moment," Charles said quietly, but with an authority that reminded both women that he was, ultimately, the king. And if the staff sees their monarch showing compassion to a struggling family member, perhaps that's not such a terrible thing for them to witness. This statement represented a fundamental challenge to the traditional approach to royal behavior. For generations, the royal family had maintained its mystique and authority partly through emotional distance, through the projection of superhuman composure and control. The idea that showing vulnerability, either their own or their response to others, could be a strength rather than a weakness was revolutionary in the context of royal tradition. Camilla's face went pale with shock, and something that might have been fear. She had built her acceptance within the royal family on her understanding of how to navigate its complex requirements, how to balance public perception with private reality. Charles's suggestion that they should openly display emotion, that they should prioritize human feeling over royal protocol, threatened everything she believed about how the monarchy must function to survive. "Charles," she said, and now her voice carried a note of desperation beneath its controlled surface, "you're making a mistake. The monarchy survives because it represents stability, reliability, something above the chaos of ordinary human emotion. If we start showing weakness, start displaying our struggles publicly, we lose the very thing that makes us relevant." Kate felt the weight of this argument settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The suggestion that her pain, her need for support, represented weakness that could damage the institution she had devoted her life to serving, filled her with shame and self-recrimination. Maybe Camilla was right. Maybe her inability to handle the pressures of royal life silently and alone was indeed a failing that put the entire family at risk. But Charles had lived through the cost of such thinking. He had watched Diana struggle under similar pressures, had seen how the lack of genuine support and understanding had contributed to the breakdown of relationships and, ultimately, to tragedy. He had learned from his own experience that suppressing human emotion and need didn't make them disappear. It simply drove them underground, where they could emerge in more destructive ways. "The monarchy survives," Charles said, his voice growing stronger with conviction, "because it represents the best of human values, including compassion, family loyalty, and the willingness to support those who are suffering. If we abandon those values for the sake of appearance, we become nothing more than an expensive costume drama." These words hung in the air like a declaration of war against everything Camilla had believed about royal duty. She stared at her husband, seeing in his face a determination that she recognized from the years when he had fought for their right to be together. But this time, his determination was arrayed not in support of their relationship, but in potential opposition to her judgment and wishes. Kate looked between the two people who had become central figures in her royal life, understanding that this moment was about much more than her personal struggles. This was about fundamental questions of what it meant to be royal in the modern world, about whether the institution could evolve to accommodate human need and emotion, or whether it would continue to demand the suppression of such things in service of an image that might no longer be sustainable or relevant. The sound of approaching voices in the distance reminded all three of them that they were not operating in a vacuum. Their choices would have consequences that extended far beyond their personal relationships. But, rather than encouraging resolution, the reminder of outside pressure seemed to crystallize their positions and make compromise more difficult. Camilla made one final attempt to appeal to Charles's sense of duty and partnership. "You know I love Kate," she said, and the sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. "But I also love this institution, and I love you too much to watch you make a decision that could damage everything we've worked to build." Sometimes love means saying no to immediate comfort in service of longer-term welfare. This argument struck at Charles's deepest values and commitments. His love for Camilla was real and profound, built on years of shared struggle and mutual support. His respect for her judgment had been earned through countless situations where her advice had proven wise and her instincts sound. The suggestion that he was betraying their partnership, their shared commitment to the monarchy, by choosing to comfort Kate in this moment, created a conflict that reached to the core of his identity. Kate, listening to this exchange, felt the full weight of the position she had unwittingly created. Her need for comfort had become a test of loyalties, a catalyst for fundamental disagreements about the nature and purpose of royal duty. The guilt and responsibility she felt for creating this situation threatened to overwhelm her entirely. But Charles, looking at Kate's face, seeing the pain and self-blame written there, felt his resolve strengthen rather than weaken. This was exactly what he had hoped to prevent: Kate's struggles becoming a source of additional guilt and isolation rather than an opportunity for family support and healing. "Camilla," he said, turning to face his wife fully while keeping his hand firmly clasped around Kate's, "I understand your concerns, and I value your wisdom more than I can express. But, in this moment, I choose to trust that showing compassion will strengthen rather than weaken us, both as a family and as an institution." The word "choose" carried the weight of finality. Charles had made his decision, and it was clear that he would not be swayed by further argument. The question now was how Camilla would respond to this direct challenge to her authority and judgment, and what the consequences of this moment would be for all three of them. The finality in Charles's voice reverberated through the corridor like the closing of a door. Camilla stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, her face cycling through emotions too complex for easy interpretation: surprise, hurt, anger, and something that might have been fear. This was not how she had expected this confrontation to end. Throughout their marriage, Charles had trusted her judgment on matters of royal protocol and public perception, had relied on her experience and wisdom to guide their decisions. Kate felt as though she were watching a slow-motion collision, understanding that whatever happened next would irrevocably change the dynamics of the royal family. Charles's decision to maintain their connection despite Camilla's clear disapproval was both a profound gift and a terrible burden. She was grateful for his support, but terrified of the price he might pay for choosing to offer it. Camilla's response, when it came, was delivered with the controlled precision of someone who had spent decades learning to mask devastating emotion behind royal composure. "I see," she said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that Charles knew well enough to recognize as profound hurt and disappointment. "I understand where your loyalties lie." These words were carefully chosen for maximum impact. The suggestion that Charles's decision represented a betrayal of loyalty, rather than an expression of compassion, was designed to make him question his choice and, perhaps, reconsider his position. But Charles had moved past the point of reconsideration. Kate's need for support had awakened something in him that wouldn't be silenced by guilt or duty. "This isn't about loyalty," Charles replied, his voice gentle but unwavering. "This is about love. I love you, Camilla, more than I can express. But I also love Kate as a daughter, and, right now, she needs support more than we need perfect protocol." The comparison stung Camilla more than she cared to admit. The suggestion that Kate was like a daughter to Charles, that their relationship had a familial intimacy that transcended formal royal roles, highlighted the unique place Kate held in Charles's heart. It wasn't that Camilla was jealous of Kate in a romantic sense. That would have been easier to understand and address. Rather, She was confronted with the reality that Charles's paternal feelings toward Kate might override his partnership with her when the two came into conflict. Kate wanted desperately to speak, to tell them both that she didn't need this support if it was going to damage their relationship, that she could manage her struggles alone rather than create division within the family. But she also knew that any word she spoke now would likely make the situation worse, would be seen as either manipulative or dismissive of the very real issues being discussed. The approaching voices in the distance had grown louder, and all three of them could hear palace staff beginning to coordinate the search for the missing royals. The gala program was falling behind schedule, guests were becoming restless, and the careful choreography of royal events was beginning to break down. Every additional moment they spent in this corridor increased the likelihood that their absence would become a story in itself. Camilla seemed to come to a decision. Her posture straightened, her expression shifted into the mask of pleasant composure that she wore like armor, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had learned to cut losses when necessary. "Very well," she said, "but understand that I cannot be part of this display. I will return to our guests and make the appropriate excuses for the delay." The word display was chosen deliberately, designed to frame Charles's support of Kate as theatrical rather than genuine, as performance rather than authentic emotion. It was Camilla's way of maintaining her position while withdrawing from a battle she could no longer win. If Charles was determined to proceed with what she saw as a mistake, she would not allow herself to be implicated in the consequences. Charles felt the sting of Camilla's withdrawal, understood the cost of his choice in the growing distance he could see in her eyes. Their marriage had been built on mutual support and shared understanding, and his decision to prioritize Kate's immediate needs over Camilla's judgment represented a crack in that foundation. He hoped it could be repaired, but he also knew that some decisions, once made, changed relationships permanently. "I'll join you in just a moment," Charles said, trying to maintain some connection with his wife even as he continued to hold Kate's hand. "Please give my apologies to the Archbishop, and let him know I'll be available shortly." Camilla nodded stiffly, a gesture that managed to convey both acceptance of his words and disapproval of his choices. As she turned to leave, she paused and looked back at Kate, her expression softening just slightly from its previous coldness. "Kate," she said quietly, "I hope you understand that my concerns come from a place of genuine care for this family and institution. I've seen what can happen when emotion overwhelms duty, and I'm trying to protect all of us from those consequences." These words, delivered with unexpected gentleness, revealed the complexity of Camilla's position. Her opposition to Charles's support of Kate wasn't born purely from coldness or a desire for control. It came from her own experience of how royal life could destroy those who weren't strong enough to maintain emotional distance. She had survived her own crucible of public criticism and family tension by learning to compartmentalize feeling and focus on duty, and she genuinely believed that this approach was necessary for survival within the royal system. Kate found her voice for the first time since this confrontation had begun. "I understand," she said softly, her words carrying both gratitude for Camilla's explanation and apology for creating this situation. "I never wanted to create problems for the family. Her voice caught slightly. "I just didn't know how to carry everything alone anymore." This admission of vulnerability, delivered with such raw honesty, seemed to impact both Charles and Camilla in different ways. Charles felt his decision validated. Kate's struggle was real and serious, deserving of support regardless of protocol. Camilla, however, heard in Kate's words an echo of her own past struggles, a reminder of the loneliness and pressure that had once threatened to overwhelm her own ability to function within royal constraints. For a moment, something shifted in Camilla's expression, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even sympathy, for the young woman who was walking a path she herself had traveled years earlier. The difference was that Camilla had learned to handle that journey alone, had developed the emotional armor necessary to survive without visible support, while Kate was still struggling to find ways to cope with pressures that seemed to grow heavier with each passing month. "We all have to find ways to be stronger than we think we can be," Camilla said finally, her words carrying both challenge and encouragement. "The crown demands nothing less." With that, she turned and walked back toward the main hall, her heels clicking against the marble floor with decisive authority. Charles and Kate were left alone in the corridor, still connected by their clasped hands, but both understanding that this moment had changed everything about their family dynamics. Charles turned his full attention to Kate, seeing in her face the exhaustion that came from months of struggle, the relief of finally being seen and supported, and the fear of what consequences might flow from this evening's events. "Kate," he said gently, "I want you to know that what just happened was not your fault. The pressures you're feeling, the struggles you're experiencing, these are real, and they deserve attention and support." Kate's eyes filled with tears for the first time that evening. Not tears of sadness or frustration, but tears of gratitude and relief. For months, she had felt as though she were drowning while everyone around her complimented her swimming technique. Charles's willingness to acknowledge her pain, to offer support despite the obvious cost to his relationship with Camilla, felt like being thrown a lifeline when she had almost given up hope of rescue. "I don't want to cause problems between you and Camilla," Kate said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I saw how much my needing support hurt her, how it challenged her views about what we should be able to handle alone." Charles squeezed her hand gently, a gesture that conveyed both comfort and determination. "Camilla and I will work through this," he said, though he wasn't entirely certain that was true. "Our marriage is strong enough to survive disagreements, even fundamental ones. But, Kate, you cannot carry the weight of protecting our relationship at the expense of your own well-being." These words represented a profound shift in how Charles understood his role within the family. For years, he had tried to balance competing needs and loyalties, often choosing the path that maintained harmony even when it might not have been the most supportive of individual family members. Tonight, he had chosen to prioritize immediate human need over long-term family diplomacy, and while the consequences remained unknown, he felt more aligned with his deepest values than he had in years. The sound of approaching footsteps indicated that their time alone was drawing to a close. Palace staff would soon find them. The evening's obligations would reassert themselves, and they would both have to return to the performance that royal life demanded. But something fundamental had changed in those few moments of connection and conflict. Kate no longer felt completely alone in her struggles, and Charles had rediscovered the power of choosing compassion over convenience. As they prepared to face the rest of the evening together, both understood that they would be entering a new chapter of their relationship, one marked by deeper understanding but also by the knowledge that their bond had come at a significant cost to Charles's marriage and Camilla's sense of authority within the family. 3 weeks after the gala, the ripple effects of that corridor confrontation continued to reshape the dynamics within the royal family in ways both subtle and profound. The immediate aftermath had been managed with the practiced efficiency that the palace staff had perfected over decades. The evening had concluded successfully. Photographs had been taken showing unity and composure, and the media had reported nothing more than a successful charitable gathering. But beneath the surface of royal normalcy, fundamental relationships were being redefined. Charles and Camilla's marriage had entered a period of careful navigation that both found exhausting and unfamiliar. They continued to appear together at public engagements, maintained their shared commitments and responsibilities, but their private conversations had taken on a formal quality that hadn't existed since the early years of their relationship. Camilla felt betrayed not just by Charles's decision in the corridor, but by what she saw as his willingness to prioritize Kate's needs over their partnership. The queen consort had thrown herself into her royal duties with renewed intensity, as if perfect execution of her role could somehow prove the rightness of her position about royal behavior and emotional control. She attended events with flawless composure, delivered speeches with commanding authority, and maintained relationships with precision and grace. But Charles could see the effort it cost her, could recognize the way she held herself slightly apart from him even when they were alone. Kate, meanwhile, had experienced a gradual lifting of the crushing weight that had been threatening to overwhelm her for months. Charles's support in that corridor hadn't solved her underlying struggles, but it had given her something she hadn't realized she desperately needed: the knowledge that she wasn't facing those struggles entirely alone. In the weeks that followed, Charles had quietly arranged for Kate to have access to additional support resources, including a trusted counselor who specialized in helping people navigate high-pressure public roles. The relationship between Charles and Kate had deepened in ways that surprised them both. Their weekly meetings, ostensibly about royal duties and scheduling, had become opportunities for genuine conversation about the challenges of public life, the pressure of constant scrutiny, and the difficulty of maintaining personal identity within institutional constraints. Charles found himself sharing stories of his own struggles with royal expectations, moments when he had felt overwhelmed by duty or isolated by protocol. Kate began to understand that Charles's support in the corridor hadn't been an impulsive gesture of kindness, but rather the action of someone who had lived through similar challenges and recognized the signs of someone approaching a breaking point. His willingness to risk his relationship with Camilla to offer that support had shown Kate that she truly was valued as more than just a performer of royal duties. She was seen as a human being deserving of compassion and understanding. The changes in family dynamics hadn't gone unnoticed by other members of the royal household. William, returning from his Scotland engagements, had immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere between his father, stepmother, and wife. When Kate finally shared with him what had happened at the gala, his response had been complex: gratitude toward his father for supporting Kate, concern about the impact on Charles and Camilla's marriage, and guilt that he hadn't recognized how much Kate had been struggling. William's relationship with both his father and stepmother became more thoughtful and deliberate as he tried to navigate the new landscape of family loyalties and tensions. He spent more time in individual conversation with Charles, expressing appreciation for his support of Kate, while also acknowledging the difficult position it had created. With Camilla, William was careful to show continued respect and affection, understanding that her reaction to the corridor incident had come from genuine concern for the family and institution they all served. The palace staff, with their finely tuned instincts for royal relationships, had also noted the changes in family dynamics. The warm, easy relationship between Charles and Camilla that had been a stabilizing force for years had become more formal and careful. Conversely, the interaction between Charles and Kate had gained a depth and intimacy that reflected genuine mutual understanding and support. Lady Pemberton, Kate's private secretary and a woman who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, had observed Kate's gradual return to emotional stability with professional satisfaction and personal relief. She had watched many royal family members struggle with the unique pressures of their roles, and had seen how lack of support could lead to devastating consequences. Charles's decision to prioritize Kate's emotional needs had, in Lady Pemberton's experienced opinion, likely prevented a much more serious crisis. The media, always alert to changes in royal behavior, had begun to notice subtle shifts in the family's public presentations. While Charles and Camilla continued to appear together at official functions, their body language had become more formal, lacking the easy intimacy that had characterized their public appearances in recent years. Conversely, Charles and Kate had been photographed in several moments of what appeared to be genuine conversation and connection, leading to speculation about a growing bond between the king and his daughter-in-law. Royal correspondents, trained to read the subtle signs of family dynamics, had begun to craft narratives about possible tensions within the royal marriage and the strengthening relationship between Charles and Kate. These stories were largely speculative, as none of the actual participants had spoken publicly about the corridor incident, but the cumulative effect of observed changes in behavior had created a new narrative about family relationships and loyalties. Charles found himself reflecting deeply on the choices he had made and their consequences. He didn't regret supporting Kate in her moment of need. That decision had aligned with his deepest values about family, compassion, and leadership. But he deeply regretted the cost to his relationship with Camilla, and he struggled with how to repair the damage without undermining the support he had offered Kate. In quiet moments, Charles often returned mentally to that corridor, analyzing whether he could have handled the situation differently while still providing Kate with the support she needed. He concluded that the fundamental choice between protocol and compassion had been unavoidable, but he wondered if he could have found ways to make that choice less painful for Camilla. Camilla, for her part, had spent considerable time examining her own reaction to the corridor incident. She remained convinced that her concerns about royal protocol and public perception had been valid, but she had begun to question whether her delivery of those concerns had been needlessly harsh. She had also started to recognize that her own survival strategy, emotional distance, and unwavering focus on duty might not be the only valid approach to royal life. The Queen Consort had begun to observe Kate more carefully in the weeks following their confrontation, noting the younger woman's gradual return to genuine engagement with her royal duties. Kate's smile had regained its natural warmth, her interactions with the public had recovered their spontaneous quality, and her overall demeanor reflected someone who was no longer carrying an unbearable burden alone. These observations forced Camilla to confront the possibility that Charles's approach might have been effective, even if she continued to believe it had been inappropriate. Kate had used the breathing space created by Charles's support to address some of the underlying issues that had been contributing to her struggles. The counseling sessions had helped her develop better strategies for managing the pressure of constant public scrutiny and the challenges of balancing personal needs with royal duties. She had also worked to improve communication with William about her struggles, helping him understand how he could better support her through difficult periods. Perhaps most importantly, Kate had begun to develop a more sustainable relationship with her royal role. Instead of trying to be perfect in every moment, she had learned to accept that struggles and vulnerabilities were part of the human experience, even for members of the royal family. Charles's willingness to support her through a difficult moment had shown her that seeking help wasn't a sign of weakness or failure, but rather a necessary part of maintaining long-term effectiveness and well-being. The incident had also sparked broader conversations within the royal household about how to better support family members who were struggling with the unique pressures of royal life. These discussions, while confidential, had led to subtle changes in how private secretaries monitored the well-being of royal family members and how support resources were made available to those who needed them. As autumn progressed into winter, the new equilibrium within the royal family continued to evolve. Charles and Camilla began the slow process of rebuilding their relationship, though both understood that it would never return to exactly what it had been before. Their love for each other remained strong, but it was now tempered by the knowledge that they could hold fundamentally different views about what royal duty required and what family loyalty demanded. Charles and Kate's relationship had settled into a pattern of mutual support and understanding that benefited them both. Kate had gained not just emotional support, but also practical wisdom about navigating royal challenges from someone who had faced similar struggles throughout his life. Charles had rediscovered the satisfaction of using his experience and position to genuinely help someone he cared about, reminding him of the positive aspects of his role that sometimes got lost in the weight of ceremony and duty. The royal family as a whole had emerged from this crisis with a deeper, if more complex, understanding of the challenges they all faced and the importance of supporting each other through difficult times. While the incident had created tensions that would take time to fully resolve, it had also demonstrated that their bonds were strong enough to survive fundamental disagreements about values and priorities. In the end, the story of Charles clutching Kate's hand in silent plea and Camilla's demand that he let go had become more than just a moment of family drama. It had become a catalyst for growth, understanding, and a more nuanced approach to balancing institutional requirements with human needs. The royal family had learned that sometimes the most important act of leadership is simply refusing to let someone suffer alone, regardless of what protocol might demand.